Hey, y'all, I'm Noah Huisman. I'm a lawyer, writer, podcaster, fitness enthusiast, and all things health and wellness. Catch me on this week's episode of The Jesse T Show.
Noah Huisman, welcome to The Jesse T Show, brother.
Great to be here, man.
Man, what a great time for you and all the things you have going on in the world. And just for some color and some context, you and I connected a couple months back in Austin when I went down there to visit CJ Finley, one of your good friends, and you do a lot of stuff with him. And you and I connected, and we were like, man, we got to talk about the things that you're doing. So here it is, man.
Yeah. It's been percolating in the back of my mind, and so I've been making sure that I have good enough material to talk about and plenty of stuff to talk about, especially with the book launching here pretty quickly, and then have some other things since we last spoke actually that have sort of started, launched, and taken off. So looking forward to talking about it all.
Brother, we're going to get into it. And I definitely want to, just commend you on all that you've been doing, because I've been watching you from afar on social media and getting into your ongoings, and you've been a busy boy, man. So talk to us a little bit about before all of these things that you have going on now, what led you to today? Who are you? What made you you? What brought you to today?
Yeah. So I'll give the quick synopsis. So I grew up in Iowa, went to college in South Dakota, went to law school in Minneapolis, lived in Minneapolis for 7 years, practiced law there for 4.5 years before I moved here to Austin last January. Corporate attorney, mergers and acquisitions, venture capital, sort of the type of lawyer you think about when you think about the people that are in the office for 70 to 80 hours a week, constantly on call, never really have any weekends or time off. And so it was a grind for 4 years. I actually left that law firm at the end of November, which I'm sure we'll talk about later when we get to talking about the book. But right around COVID, like when COVID first hit, like 2 years ago at this point, almost 2 years ago at this point, is like March of 2020, I believe. It forced a lot of folks, as it did me, to sort of sit with themselves and the decisions they'd made for their life and sort of the trajectory they were on and whether or not they wanted to stay on that trajectory. I love the practice of law, but I just realized that it was killing my soul. All of the things and passions that I had held dear, whether it was writing, music, dancing, whatever, family, all of those things that I said I prioritized or said I loved have sort of were pushed to the fringes of my life. And so I started to think about what my life would look like if I pursued my dreams relentlessly and stopped letting this soul-sucking thing take the best pieces of me. And so it kind of made it an intentional decision to start prioritizing the things that fed me. And so with that, one of the first things I did is I started a podcast with a buddy up in Minneapolis that we were rolling before I moved down to Austin. And then we pressed pause when I moved down here. But I started that podcast. And then on that podcast, as I'm sure you can identify with, you catch yourself talking about sort of similar wants, desires, wishes over and over again. I'll be like, oh man, that sounds great. I can't wait to do that one day. One of those things for me that I talked about over and over again was owning a gym. I knew that was something I always wanted to do. I played college football. And so that health and wellness, fitness space has always been something near and dear to my heart. Especially on the recovery side, I had my fair share of injuries: reconstructed shoulder, broken back, sports hernia, broken hand, concussions. So the recovery component became very special to me, especially with sort of neurodegenerative diseases in my familial history. Sort of finding those methods to delay and or prevent sort of Alzheimer's or just neurodegenerative conditions generally. So anyway, connected with a guy in Minneapolis and took my bonus check from that year. And instead of sort of dumping it, into the much like the book of like created this thing that I had wanted, which was this recovery center. I jokingly call it the rehab lab, but it's where I would go all the time. And it kept me sane. And it kept me motivated and it kept me rejuvenated. And So it wasn't like that was in September of 2020. And then sort of as I felt myself come back to life each time I sort of poured into a passion, it made me start to experiment even more. And so that was when I moved. Then I got to thinking, and I moved to Austin January 2021 and had the good fortune to meet CJ and a bunch of the good energy that's just in Austin.
It's amazing. It's incredible.
Yeah. And it's Austin is one of those places. I've been asked frequently about why I love Austin so much or what I think makes it such a special place. And if I had to encapsulate it in a sentence, it is truly, I believe, a place you come to establish a relationship with the person you want to be. Now, I'm not saying you can't find that other places, but for me as an individual who sort of felt like I had buried sort of the playful person that had a voice and sort of stifled and suffocated myself, to come to Austin and then have that pulled out of me by people who refuse to let me settle for anything less than I could be, was an absolutely amazing phenomenon. As somebody who historically didn't share many details about my life, and then the last year and a half, being around CJ and some of the other folks here who have encouraged me to share more and more, it's just been a fantastic ride. And then that's the process that sparked sort of extracting this book out of me and sort of getting me to a situation where I'm going to be publishing a book here in the next few weeks. So that's I know you said a short get what got you to where we are today, but that's a little bit of a longer version.
No, that's amazing. And I love to dive into so many pieces of that, from the biohacking to the background to the, the move and being in Austin. And I want to start with being in Austin because Austin's been calling on my heart for years. And it's really interesting because, I was drawn to Austin years ago just by a conference they were holding. And it's amazing how your soul knows, like your soul, if you really listen and you I know you're big into Stoicism, which we'll talk about, but if you listen to your intuition and you're clear of mind and you're true with what your thoughts and your feelings are, you can really tap into like what you're meant to do. And for me, Austin called on me so many times for so many reasons. For back in the day, it was South by Southwest and guys that I was following like Gary Vee and Tim Ferriss and like all these different people were like, yeah, I want to go be around that scene. And the startup scene had been like, it was labeled the new Silicon Valley kind of thing, like all these things. And I was like, this is really cool. But then I started getting really deep into my spirituality, and come guys like Aubrey Marcus and Kyle Kingsbury and Joe Rogan and all these, and Joe Rogan lives there now and he's bringing a whole comedy scene, the best comedians in the world to come into Austin. And it's like, there's something magical in Austin. And for me, when I was there, I felt like I was home, and I spent a long weekend there, and it was like I was coming home and meeting people like you and CJ, a gal, Nicole Lano, and Dr. Alex Mosley. Sorry, I met her with CJ. So like all these people. And one thing I found in common down there is people just seem happier. People seem happier.
Facts.
People are, for me, it's a hodgepodge of like very high functioning spiritual people that are into entrepreneurship, that are into health and wellness, that are into relationships, that love good food, love music. I mean, it's a scene down there, man. It's incredible.
It is incredible. I'll hit on a few things of that. One, it just your intuition telling you things. I 100% could not agree more. I think that especially in an age where the world spins faster and faster, it's not that our soul isn't leading us, it's that we're not listening.
Yes.
And it becomes easier and easier in an age of distraction to sort of drown that voice out, and harder to justify taking time because you feel like you're not making progress or you're falling behind. But there are those little tugs that if you just witness yourself, I'm a firm believer in, because people ask me all the time, like, oh, what brought you to Austin? And I'm like, intuition.
Yeah.
I don't have a better answer than that.
You don't need
yeah, no, I know. But the best part about Austin is like when you say that, you might be ashamed of like saying that in other places. You say that in Austin, and everybody's like, right on. That's sweet.
People get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, okay, this is why I fell in love. This is why it led me here.
Hell yeah.
But you're absolutely right. And I've had enough of these conversations now to try to diagnose exactly, like precisely what I think it is about what you're talking about. These people sort of just generally seeming happier. And I think it's because like the type of person that Austin attracts because they're so it's such go-getters and like getting after their passion and pursuing their passion, they don't have time to critique you. Like they don't have time. Like everybody's busy pursuing their own thing. So the
Yes.
last thing they want to do is like try to tear you down, because they're comfortable enough in what they're doing and satisfied enough with their own life that like it's truly abundance mindset. There is some scarcity there, like there is everywhere, but this is the best place I've ever found in terms of people just doing their own thing, and then wanting to help each other out because they're not self-conscious about what they're doing with their own life. They're confident enough to be like, no, cool. Like you go get what you're going to get. I'm going to go get what I'm going to get. And like, together we're going to make this place sick.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
It's great. Come
It's
on over, brother.
I am. So, I'm thinking in my mind. So for me, I have 2 kids, 7 and 5 here in Georgia, and I'm going to, obviously be where they are. But, in terms of dream weaving and talking about setting up dreams for the future, one of my next goals is a beach house. But then also, why not get like a crash pad and turn it into maybe like an Airbnb or something in Austin? And I can get down to Austin once a month and, build some business, build some connections and do some stuff out there. And man, I just love that whole scene from, I know you're affiliated with a couple things down there, but I went to Squatch Frontier Fitness, and that place is amazing. On it is down there, and I have an affinity for those folks, and it's incredible, like what kind of people are drawn to that place. But jumping back into your story, man, and this is something that's been big for me over the last few years, is Stoicism. And it's interesting because I was halfway through writing a book called Happy Wealth, and it talked about mindset, it talked about emotional behavioral stuff, it talked about Stoicism, it talked about the idea of memento mori, which is completely written into my life story, with losing people that I've held until they died, and giving me the perspective of gratitude, of time, and being alive. And what would you do right now if this was your last moment? How would you show up in the world? And for people that are listening, memento mori says, remember that you must die, but use that as a tailwind to push you, vigorously through life, through relationships and business and all these beautiful things. And for me, it landed for me a couple of years ago with, I'm really a big believer that, I'm big into spirituality, as I mentioned before. So like, I feel like the universe will punch you in the face when it's trying to tell you something. And so things like podcasts, like you mentioned to me, like a podcast, and then, someone over here that has nothing to do with this conversation mentions the same exact podcast, same exact episode, same thing for a book, same thing for this. It's like, okay, it's time to pay attention to these little cues and clues. And for me, this happened with Stoicism years ago. And it was Tim Ferriss, who's really big into Stoicism. And it was all these different people that were like, okay. And so I started going down this path of learning about Stoicism. And it really landed for me because when I was, years ago, I held my daughter till she passed away, I held my mom till she passed away. I've been around a lot of these crazy circumstances, but I realized I was given those experiences, to be grateful for the life that I have and the time that I have, and what do I do at that time? So for me, it definitely makes a huge impact in the way I live my life. But for you, where did Stoicism come in for you, and how has it changed your life?
Yeah, it's changed my life in so many ways. So how it came into my life was before I decided law school. I had a mentor in college. I was going to go to business school, but my mentor at the time, who had been to law school, he sort of talked me into pursuing a route within the legal world where I could weave business and law together. And so I didn't know that was a possibility. Whenever I thought lawyer, I thought courtroom. Yes. And I just wasn't interested in that. I'm not an adversarial person. I'm not somebody that likes those zero-sum games, because that's what you're doing in a courtroom. One side wins, one side loses. Versus on the corporate side, it's very much positive sum. And the idea is that each side can win, and you can strike a deal that's beneficial to both sides. But once I decided law school, I then approached my mentor again and said, do you have any books that would be denser in material that would prepare me for the types of books I'm going to have to read to start to discipline myself to read dense material? What he gave me was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, yeah.
And so the summer before I went to law school, I remember I still have pictures on my phone, actually. It was the first time I started this practice of taking pictures of pages in books to keep in an album I call Sanctuary that I'll go to occasionally. And so I have like some of my favorite pages from meditation still saved in there. And like one I'll never forget is, it's like, the ceaseless passage of time makes eternity ever young. Like, who writes like that? Like, that is such a great, it's so poetic and so beautiful. And you're also talking about the most powerful man in the Roman Empire at the time, the power over like life and death over everybody in the known world. And all he cares about is being a good person. Like, who is this man?
Yep.
Like, where does that strength come from? And so he quickly sort of ascended to my went to college in South Dakota. So I'll say my Mount Rushmore, my Council of Kings, tribe of mentors, whatever you want to call it, sort of my inner council. So it's him, Solomon, and Abraham Lincoln are the three that are up there for me. But
not a bad trio. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I fell in love with Stoicism. And then I went to law school, and honestly, a lot of law, this is where it broadened from Stoicism to just philosophy generally, because a lot of the foundations of law school you're talking about Plato's Republic, and that's like the beginnings of government. And then you got Cicero, the Roman orator. And then like a lot of those original philosophers, most of what they were talking about is, okay, we know what we know about human nature. How do we set up systems of government that best preserve sort of this pursuit of happiness, which we see in our founding document, Declaration of Independence. And so it's sort of that preserved this love of philosophy generally for me. And it wasn't until I graduated law school when I refound Stoicism. I only knew Marcus Aurelius, but then I found Seneca through Tim Ferriss and, Epictetus. And I really tried to make it, there's a lot, the podcast that I started with my buddy in Minneapolis is that a lot of what we talked about. And I just sort of fell in love with all of it. And one of the ways it's changed my life, going back to hyperlinking to what you were saying about memento mori, Marcus also has this idea of bonus time. And so him and Seneca both have sayings in their writings about imagining as if sort of your life ended today and the rest is bonus time. Like in Latin, it's tempus subsicivum, extra time. And so for me personally, when I was going into my senior year in high school, the summer before my senior year, I lived in like a town of 30,000 people, but my best friend at the time lived in a town of like 1,000 people.
Wow.
So I would go there all the time. We went there. It was like one summer night, and we went to a friend's house. And then to get home from that friend's house, you had to travel on all these gravel roads. So we're traveling on this gravel road
by foot,
and by car.
Okay.
We're traveling on this gravel road I've never traveled on by car. And I'm following a friend that's in front of me, and he's sort of kicking up dust, and I'm not having a hard time seeing. I've never been on this road before. Little did I know at the time, it was freshly laid gravel, and we were coming up on a T intersection where the headlamp, like the lamp at the T intersection, was out, so there was no indicator. So I had no idea we're coming up on a T. And by the time we were only going like 30 miles an hour. By the time I saw that a ditch sort of was my destiny, I was able to turn the car just enough, but not stop, just enough to where then once we hit the ditch, the car popped up and flipped, and we landed upside down in the ditch. Neither of us were wearing seatbelts. Turned out that we swapped positions while in midair. So that when like we were upside down and I woke up in the ditch, I was on the passenger side, he was on the driver's side.
Yeah.
The only scars, I have a scar right here and right here where glass sort of entered and got lodged into my arm. He got a concussion, but other than that, we were unscathed.
Wow.
And so that's like a memory that has stuck with me as like, why am I here? People have died for far less. Then I sort of encountered those words about Marcus about bonus time. And then I started thinking about that as the day I died. It's like, no, everything, all of the good, the bad, the ugly, like this is all an opportunity to experience the gradients of life, even the bad things.
Yes.
Like even like, because if you get to the end of your life and somebody tells you like, oh, you didn't even experience like the worst that life has to offer, you would probably feel kind of cheated because you didn't get to experience that flavor. Even though it would have sucked, it's still involved in experiencing the fullness of life, like in shading in sort of everything, that entire spectrum.
And it gives you perspective for the things that you could be grateful for.
100%. And so I would say that's where Stoicism for me has made the biggest difference, is sort of just painting that picture of, like it's all bone. I spent a significant amount of time in the book talking about this. So it's like, from Seneca, the main lessons are like that, how much we defer life. So he says, the fool for all his faults has this also, he's always getting ready to live. And so it's that idea of Proverbs in the Bible says something similar. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but desire fulfilled is the tree of life. those two things, me encountering those two things was what started this domino effect of me writing the book, me owning the gym, is I realized how much I was making myself sick by putting off my dreams until someday.
Yes.
And you might recognize this from Tim Ferriss, but it's like someday is the disease that takes our dreams with us to the grave. So that's one of the things that Seneca taught me. And then he also sort of taught me about, it's not the man who has little who is poor, but it's the man who's constantly yearning for more. And so it's that idea of always wanting more. And then, you got Epictetus, who talks about the dichotomy of control, of like separating out the things you can control and those you can't, and then focusing your attention on the things you can. And then, you got this tool from Marcus, then we get impermanent, everything is impermanent and change. And sort of, this is Abraham Lincoln and him both say the same thing, like that this too shall pass, sort of situation. And then obviously we get the bonus time stuff from Marcus, but just the tools, mindset, operating system that it gives you in terms of in high stress environments, or where you consider high stakes, or even like once you start to achieve a certain level of success, you start to get attached to the glitter and the gold and the things you have,
and the identity, then you start, the status.
100%. And then you start to get, there's this anxiety that starts to bubble up with the thought that you might lose those things. And then my favorite thing that Seneca says is nothing except the soul is worthy of wonder. And so it's like that reminder of when I find myself catching myself of like, oh, but what if this happens? And then I lose these things. And then I like remind myself of like, so what? It's not yours to begin with. Like, it's just been super helpful in all those regards, just sort of helping me remain centered and grounded, and sort of cultivating indifference to the things that will fade and don't matter, so I can make space for the things that do.
So there's this thought that's coming up for me as you're speaking about these things, and it comes down to discipline for so many things. And all the things that you're into, from being an entrepreneur to being in health and wellness, to writing a book, to everything that you do and who you are, really comes down to discipline. And a lot of things that because to write a book takes discipline, to create an outline, however there's so many ways to write a book, but you have to sit down and actually do it. And to get to the gym and to eat right, to sleep right, and to, if you're into biohacking, to do all these other things, from thermogenesis, cold plunges, sauna, like these are things. Yes, we love these things. Like I have a lake down the street, and I'll go to the lake when it's like 20 degrees outside, and I'll get in the lake because I love doing that stuff. But there is some discipline involved in that, especially the days you don't want to do it. So I know that you played sports, and I know there's a lot of discipline in sports, and I know that you're into Stoicism. There's a discipline mindset there too. But where does your discipline come from? And then specifically in the moments where you don't feel like doing it, or if you go through a rut, like we all kind of go through ruts, what are some things that you're using to stay on track with your discipline?
Yeah. So I will, I mean, as so many people's origin stories are, mine is parents through and through. So specifically, just a quick story on my personal, my family history. About a year before I was born, my family lost everything to a fire. Wow. So I have an older brother, older sister. And so everything was wiped out, all possessions. And I was sort of born into this family that didn't have anything. And the things that we did have was basically the charity of other people, things that people had donated to our family. And then I watched as, like, even as a young kid, it's like my parents, when we had nothing and they were so poor that they basically got paid to live in this income-based like trailer home. And to watch them pull themselves up to now where they make I was never wanting for anything, anything as a child. Like, yes, there were a lot of things I couldn't have, but one thing my mom always let me have was a book. Whenever we went to Barnes and Noble, like, that was the one thing we always had money for. Not much else, but that was it. It was always books. And I remember, so just watching them, and then watching my sister and my brother sort of give me the example of sort of what happens when you are disciplined. I mean, honestly, I wasn't that disciplined of a person until I got to probably like my senior year of high school.
Okay.
And I don't know what flipped the switch, but I mean, I think it probably was that near-death experience of like, you're wasting your potential. Like life isn't going to be given to you. Like, think about the sacrifices of your parents, sacrifices of everybody that have conspired to get you to this point, and you are wasting it.
Yeah.
Like that. And I think that was what flipped the switch for me. And then I went back to the first book my mom ever gave me was this book called The Richest Man Who Ever Lived by a guy, Stephen Scott. And what it does is it follows Proverbs, like the 30 Proverbs in the Bible. And one of the first things he talks about in that book is the verse, "See a man diligent in his business, he shall stand before kings." One of my favorite stories that I found like shortly after was the story of Benjamin Franklin and how his father impressed that verse upon him. And then in Benjamin Franklin's case, it turned out to actually be true because he was the diplomat to France. And so he actually stood before king, like the king of Denmark. He actually stood before kings. And so it was like that always stuck with me. And so then even when I went to law school, I don't know what made me think of this, but there was elevators. We had 3 floors. There was elevators and there were stairs. And my rule was I always had to take the stairs. And so it was like that, it was just impressing on me that there's no stairway to success, or there's no elevator to success. So like law school, like symbolically, I've always been a symbolic person. And so for me, it was like, I was like, I'm always going to take the stairs to get to class. I'm not going to take the elevator because this, how you do anything is how you do everything. So it's like, I'm prepared. True. I'm prepared to take the steps to class day in and day out. And that's going to be sort of symbolic of the journey of just putting in the work day in and day out.
Did anyone ever notice that you always took steps?
A few people actually did notice that. Yeah, a few people did. And they were kind of the closer friends of that, the ones that wanted to take elevators, and they're like, oh. And then, but I think actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, I think the reason I did take the stairs is before I went to law school, the summer before I went to law school, I worked at a law firm in Sioux Falls where I went to undergrad. And the mentor I had then told me the concept of the 20-mile march. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
No,
I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember the exact person, but this guy went on this voyage in I think it was Alaska, to where they had to it was on a boat and they had to cut through a bunch of ice and they had to go however many miles. And the captain basically said, to get there, we're never going to, it's going to be a 20-mile march. Each day we're doing 20 miles. Even if there are days we feel like we could go more, we're not going to. Even if there are days we feel like we have to go less, we're going 20 miles. And the idea is that you keep showing up every day, that 20-mile march, like on the days you don't feel like it, on the deals you feel great. But the idea is that consistency wins, diligence compounds, and persistent movement in the same direction is what's going to get you there.
Yep.
And that's been the case for me. I mean, there's been validation after validation for that in my life. I finished second in my law school class. It's not because I'm particularly genius. It's just because I sort of showed up every day and put in the work. And so I think for me, what keeps me going on the days when is just having the evidence of what it's done for me in the past, of testing the theory of that see a man diligent in his business, he shall stand before kings. And then testing that against my own experience, and then hyperlinking back to all of these situations where it is endurance wins, all bad fortune is conquered by endurance, is a quote on one of the Roan shirts that I love to wear. And it's so true. And so it's just finding ways. I'm also a huge believer that we need to be reminded more than we need to be told. So I have these little things like see a man diligent in his business, he shall stand before kings, or hope deferred makes the heart sick. But I have those quotes around me. So I see them on a day-to-day basis.
Where do you keep them? Are they, like you said, one's on a shirt? Do you have other places that you keep them?
Yeah. So I'm looking right now on the other side of this. I have a whiteboard and a cork board where I sort of keep some of those favorite things. Another one is a poem about the definition of success being to know that even one life has breathed easier because you live, that is to have succeeded. It's another one of my favorites.
Yes.
And so those things that I hold near and dear to my heart, I make sure that they're sort of in my eyesight on a regular basis, because one of the Stoic concepts they talk about is taking on the color of dead men, which is the same as sort of harvesting out the wisdom of past generations. And I think the same thing is true in modern life of we can't die our thoughts, our character, sort of our mental chatter one dip at a time. We need to sort of constantly steep ourselves in them.
Yes.
So that it only becomes like second nature and habit. So we can pull them out when we need them and can use them practically. And so it's the difference between like knowing and understanding, of like just knowing a quote versus understanding and living it out. And so that's probably my biggest trick is if it's like, if once you find something good, where like a good quote or something that really resonates with you, find a way to keep it in your eyesight at least once a day. And then that slowly it'll sort of work its way into your DNA and through your body. And before you know it, you'll be living it out.
Part of the fabric of doing and just being, and then it just becomes part of your ethos in a sense.
That's right.
Talk to me a little bit about this journey of entrepreneurship, because it's kind of interesting, especially for someone who's been an entrepreneur their whole life, on and off, up until, a few years ago, it's just been on. How did yours start, and how did you get this sense of wanting to run a business or be independent or whatever it was that attracted you to entrepreneurship? And what has the journey been like? What did it start with, and what are you doing today?
Yeah. So for me, it was after I come from a family of entrepreneurs. So my family, when I was in undergrad, my parents owned a few restaurants in Sioux Falls, and I sort of helped them manage those restaurants. Pita Pit, fast casual, based out of Idaho. And so it's always kind of been in my blood. I have other family members that have had businesses. I've always loved businesses. I always loved crunching numbers. It was one of those things where we'd go in grocery stores and I would try to calculate the change before the cashier did. And so, weird things like that. I always loved that. And then once I decided to go to law school and realized that I was giving people advice from the business side day in and day out, eventually I came to this realization that I never wanted to be the person that was giving advice about something I'd never done personally.
Yep.
And so it became very important to me to actually sort of put myself in the arena, in the fire, and figure out exactly like what are the pressures that these entrepreneurs are facing. Because one of the things I think that's missing sort of in a lot of legal advice is that recognition of what's happening on the practical business side of things.
Yep.
In terms of bridging that gap, in terms of like risk appetite and what are all the things you're having to deal with. Like you can't be fully legally compliant. It's just not like, it's not in the cards. There are so many other things you have to think about.
Yes.
So understanding those pressures and where you have to put your resources, and understanding that not everything is going to be able to be, not all your T's are going to be crossed and your I's dotted. And so it became very important for me to do that. And also I just knew that, I think it was Stephen Pressfield. He talks about the idea of a shadow career, and that gutted me. And so the idea of the shadow career is how often people sort of engage in professions that play on the periphery of the thing they actually want to be doing.
Yep.
And so in the lawyer context for me, it was like, oh, I'm advising sort of entrepreneurs as a way to dabble in it risk-free, because I get to help them build their businesses, but I don't have any of the risk. I don't have any of the skin in the game.
Yep.
And so when I encountered that, I was like mirror up in my face, and I was like, oh, he's so right. And then I just
cut
felt
down
like
to the soul.
yeah, just a huge coward. And I was like, I can't, I got to do something about this. And it's not the case for everybody, but it was one of those things where I read it and I was like, damn, that's me.
Yeah, it hit you hard, man. So what was that first business venture for you outside of, what you saw your parents do?
Yeah. So my first personal one was the gym.
Okay.
Back in 2020, the fall of 2020. So I started that one. And then
was it brick and mortar along with the thermogenesis components? Okay.
Yep. So it was just a gym originally. And I met the owner of it, Luis. Embrace North is the name of the gym. I met the owner of it because I went to one of his classes where he was renting sort of Sauna Cold. And we had a discussion about, hey, I think it'd be really cool if you made this a permanent part of the gym. Like, what would that look like? Have you thought about raising money? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, I have. And I was like, I got it. Like, let's do it. And so then that's
was this your VC connections back? Like what was it that helped you identify that you could raise the funds necessary to be able to augment that side of the business?
Well, so I didn't raise the funds. I financed it myself.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where, my VC background sort of made him comfortable enough to come to me and ask me about what his options were, to like, once we started the conversation where he wanted to take the business. And then I did offer him a few different options, but the last option was like, how would you feel if I just did this with you? Because I've always wanted to do this. I have sort of a vision.
Yes.
Turned out our visions lined up with each other. And so we made it happen. And that was the first real sort of dive into it. And then
so
probably,
just for some overview, I want to understand. So the gym Embrace North was already existing. There was already a clientele. It was, some
not really.
No. Okay.
Yeah, not really. So Embrace, like, he had just purchased this gym from these two CrossFit guys. It was called AQ Fit Lab. At that time, there was maybe like 2 or 3 people like going.
Wow.
And there wasn't really a concept. Embrace North at that point had been something it was just like a fun event that they had been doing sort of in the winter before, where people would meet up at the lake and jump in a frozen lake.
Yep.
And so when I met him, I mean, there wasn't a lot of traffic. And so then we sort of came in, and at that point it was like extracting from the CrossFit gym, because before, up to that point, it was like an ancillary part of the CrossFit gym. Like the main attraction was the CrossFit gym.
Yes.
And then people just got access to this other place that they didn't really ever go. And so then when I came in, we sort of crafted a plan for how do we make this into a sort of self-sustaining gym? How do we make this into a unique model in what I thought was a saturated group fitness market? Sort of how do we carve out a niche for ourselves and do something that nobody else is doing? And so that's sort of how the idea grew. And I mean, now we have 3 mobile saunas, like 4 ice tubs. We do balance and breath work and some personal training. We have a chiropractor in the place that sort of sees folks on a regular basis. And so it's barely turned into it's the first place I go to every time I go back to Minneapolis.
Hell yeah. Yeah. So is it also, it's obviously these wellness components and these biohacking pieces to it, but is it also a gym where people can sling weights and like move stuff around? Is it okay?
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, there's everything you would need in terms of like barbells and weights and a rower and a salt bike. And it's not huge. It's not a huge space. It's probably about the same size as Squatch, like the inside of it.
Yep.
And then we have an outside component too that's similar to Squatch's backyard. That's why I fell in love with Squatch, is because
Squatch is incredible.
I saw it as it's like a sister gym to my one in Minneapolis.
Yep.
Yeah, and so I did that in Minneapolis, and then once I came down to Austin, there's a huge sauna cold tub culture, contrast biohacking community down here, but nobody was doing mobile saunas and cold tub setups, which blew my mind for how large the community is here. And so then the natural light in my head was like, how fast can I get this down here? And obviously, having met CJ, knowing CJ was sort of involved, plugged in the community, sort of had those connections. We got it down here in November, have since done a handful of events, and each event, sort of everybody is just like, we want this at our event. And so very quickly, we're almost like overwhelmed with events because the demand is so crazy high. We're like trying to figure out how to get a few more of them to service all of these things happening. And so I'm trying to also balance that with the other things I have going on. CJ and I both have a lot going on. So it's been interesting, but at the end of the day for us, it's so much fun to just sort of bring that, like sauna cold. There's so many people doing retreats down here.
Yes.
So we're getting to go to like retreats and events and just meet so many cool, interesting people that are all interested in sort of taking care of themselves and their bodies. And so you're like put in the radius of a bunch of really cool people.
Yes.
And then it just sort of has this cascade effect of like, you're meeting cool people who introduce you to more cool people. And then it's like more and more cool people. And it's like,
the network expands. And I remember seeing video and Instagram post of the actual move of the unit itself, like driving down with the pickup truck and, capturing stuff with like drones and just like, hey, here we come. And then I remember seeing you, like you said, like it started getting out of control where like there was multiple, ice baths and there was like, in and out with the ice and the water and trying to figure all that out. Like, it looked like a hell of a journey, like learning as you go, on the job training. And so, How has that business been? Has that been something where like now you're looking at potentially scaling up the amount of units that you have and like, just broadening your reach?
Yeah. So, yes, we're looking at sort of scaling. I think with what TJ and I are both trying to balance right now is I'm actually going to be rejoining a different law firm at the end of February,
Okay.
but in a reduced capacity,
Okay.
like a half-time capacity. And that's just because I want to have the resources of a full slate of specialists when I advise companies.
Nice.
But the deal was that I basically like I'm half-time. And then also I'm only doing the work that I really want to do, which is sort of the startup VC stuff.
Beautiful.
Especially being here in Austin. That sort of there's a lot of folks to meet down here in Austin that are in that space, and inevitably it always comes up. We're in our sauna at an event, and then somebody finds out that I'm a startup attorney. Almost without fail, somebody in that sauna has something that they want help with.
Yep.
Which is cool, which is a great way to meet folks.
Automatic referral source for the type of people you want to be around. Like that's
right.
Too,
exactly.
Like, I've been in finance and I'm somewhat exiting, but for about 11 years, and I'm a wealth manager, fiduciary. I do investments and I manage money and manage people's, financial planning. But I learned a couple of years ago, because for the better part of this career, I was chasing people. I was chasing clients. I was trying to get clients, come on board. And it was a different paradigm. And once I switched my mentality and the way I actually conduct a business, I started hand selecting the types of people that I wanted to work with. And so I wasn't just chasing people. And I was essentially dating my clients. Do I like this person? Do they like me? Are we going to be able to help each other? Like, are they going to make money? Am I going to be able to help them? Like all these different things. And it really just makes it flips the script on how you live your life. And so what it did too, for me, a big part of it was in the military, we call them PITAs, PITA, pain in the ass. And so I removed so many pain in the asses from my business by choosing who I wanted to work with. It sounds very similar with what you're doing, because you're working with people that are into the same things. They're into health and wellness. They're into business. They're into, augmenting their lives for the better. And you're just sitting there in a sauna together, shooting the shit. Like, I like this person.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
No, I love that so much. And it like reminds me of, I'm sure you're familiar, like it's kind of in relationships too. It's like the don't chase, attract.
Yep.
It's like that's not limited to relationship. It's
everything.
And then I'm not sure if you've read or listened to Green Lights yet, but
oh yeah, great, unbelievable.
Yeah. The arrow doesn't seek the target draws the arrow.
Yep.
In that same thing, and that's where this goes back to my favorite Seneca quote about sort of nothing except the soul is worthy of wonder, and this idea that like magnanimous soul, magnanimous meaning sort of big souled in Greek, that is like the magnetic soul. It's the same thing. Like there's a reason that magna is at the root of both of those things. Like the magnanimous soul, the big one, is the magnetic one. So if you're doing things, if you're living your life in alignment with sort of where you feel like you need to be, then you're going to attract to those things.
No question.
And so that's been my whole pursuit, whether it's writing this book or having the sauna or having this gym, was like, how can I make my life an outflow of who I am as a human being? And like, how do I stick to my soul and not send myself away from myself?
Yep.
And like trust that the opportunities I'm looking for would attract, like I would attract those things if I was true to myself. And it's very much been the case that it's come true, which is always a nice validation. And then there are obviously still the moments where you get scared, where you're like, I don't know. But then if you like, I found that if I honor that decision and sort of like stay true to myself, it takes care of itself.
It always does. Yeah. And you're going to attract the things in your life that you're meant to. And especially if you're in accordance with like your higher self, your higher mind, your soul, like you said, the magna soul, the bigger soul. And there's this frequency that happens. You just start attracting the right things in your life. And like you said, the intuition, once you can really hone down on that intuition, at a gut level, especially for me, there's this thing called human design. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically So human design, I'm a manifesting generator, and I know to listen to my gut intensely. And this is for relationships, business opportunities. And it's like, if something doesn't feel right, I just kindly walk away from it. And it's learning how to hone that skill has become a superpower. It's almost like a spidey sense. It's like, okay, something feels off about this. Maybe I should just kind of give it some space and like not jump on it.
Yeah.
But then again, if something feels completely right, I'm a fuck yes, I go all in. So it's like there's the flip
Yeah.
side to that. But let's
Yeah.
talk real quick because I want to make sure that we tease this out. But talk about the book. Talk about, you know, what the book is, what it means to you, where it's come from, what you hope that it'll do for people that read it, all that.
Yeah. So the book is called This Way to the Stars, an Introduction to Philosophy. And the inspiration behind the title actually comes from Seneca. I think it's letter 78 from Letters to Achilles on quibbling unbecoming of a philosopher, where Seneca has this commentary about how his observation of philosophical debates have sort of turned into this, what's called quandary ethics, of like just debating like, oh, is the glass half full or half empty? Like very theoretical, not practical things. And Seneca comes in and he says, is this the promise of philosophy? Like, is this what philosophy is for? And he says, no, Sicatur ad astra, thus is the way to the stars. That is the promise of philosophy, that it should make. And then Epictetus tells us something similar of like how it would make you a worthy dinner guest of the gods. And so sort of cultivating that divinity within you to sort of elevate your own status, your own soul, and sort of make you that big souled person, that magnanimous man. So that is the promise of philosophy. And so with that inspired the title of the book. And then what I try to do throughout the book is I start in ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, sort of ancient Israel, sort of the roots of what we know about human civilization, and try to trace the ideas that we now have in Western society back to their origins. And so I pick 2 or 3 philosophers from sort of each era, each age: Mesopotamia, Egypt, sort of ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, Roman, early Christian, medieval, Renaissance, Enlightenment, early modern politic days like the Revolutionary France and America, and then the modern mind. So those are the general ages I cover. And then within each of them, I choose 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 philosophers that had influential ideas, explore 2 or 3 of their most influential ideas. And then I offer at the end of each philosopher what I call a lesson from the guide. And what that is it attempts to be a modern application of their ancient wisdom. And so I tried to approach it humbly, because I don't want to pretend like I can channel that person perfectly. But at the same time, I do think that each of them has something particularly prescient and applicable for our present life. And that's where I sort of see my role as a writer and as what I hope to be sort of like a philosopher poet, in terms of preserving the best bits of the past to make sure that they are ushered safely into the present and the future, because there are many big problems and moral like things that we're going to have to face, especially with the increasing technology. And as sort of more and more folks get power, the distribution of power becomes, whether it's cyber attacks or in the metaverse, or any individual is going to have the ability to bring civilizations down to their knees before we know it. And so if we don't sort of take the time to cultivate those sort of ethics and morality, and going back to those discussions like what it means to be a good person, it's called character ethics of the ancient Greeks and Romans. If we don't sort of make that part of everyday discussion, then we run this risk of killing ourselves, of being our own destroyers. And so what I try to do in the book is, to the best of my ability, sort of make sure that, one, these ideas from the past that I think are worthy of staying with us into the future are sort of play a role in making that part of the modern man's mind, modern human's mind. It's not just men. And then also it serves a little bit as like a history book of, Socrates says that the unexamined life is not worth living. And so what I try to do is provide the tools for other people in the same way it did for me, of examining everything that they have come to think is true, everything that they come to think about the life, how they view the world, and sort of going back to first principles and the origin to be like, oh, this is where this came from. And then, especially for me, the particularly sort of cathartic period for me was the intersection between declining Rome and rising Christianity into the Middle Ages, and sort of seeing how the philosophers and people putting out ideas at that time, sort of what dynamics were at play from a societal and cultural level, to figure out how they were riffing off each other, or maybe, what dynamics were at play. Like, Roman Empire is declining, and we got Christianity is rising, like the Romans are killing the Christians. So
Yep.
the Christians are trying to tell the Romans like, hey, you're going to have a God to answer to that stands outside time. So like, quit killing us. And at the same time, then you got the Christians delivering messages like Paul going to Corinth and Greece and talking to the Corinthians in the language of the Romans, where he sounds a lot like Seneca. And then you got Marcus Aurelius, who sounds a lot like the book of Ecclesiastes, which is attributed to Solomon, who's considered the first philosopher king. And so it's like exploring some of those dynamics of how these things were a lot more fluid than I think we think currently. In terms of there were human beings that were writing these things, and they lived in the context of a culture that had its own pressures,
Yes.
its own things happening. And so to be able to sort of look back at it and be like, oh, I've thought like I have this belief, and it actually comes from this person who is reacting to this person who is facing this pressure. And so you sort of start to cut the strings around sort of the things that aren't fully you and like aren't totally your ideas and thoughts, and you can kind of sift through. I like the analogy of like walking through the rubble of Rome and sort of like looking at the blocks of stone and being like, oh, is this one, should I use this for my new structure, like to rebuild the castle, or is like this one deserve to stay in the rubble? And sort of like that mental picture is something that sticks with me. So that's very high level what I hope to do with the book. And I would say the last part of that is I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan. And so what I like to describe as Gandalf, his stated purpose in Lord of the Rings is that if anything worthy can make it through this dark night and still bear fruit for those that come after, that's what I see as my purpose. I've heard it more than once from people I respect and admire, that we're sort of in an age of like a transition of eras, I've heard it called, of, where the old is dying, the gatekeepers are leaving their gates. And so it's sort of up to us to create this culture that we want to stand in, live in, be in the future. And so this is my way of participating in the creation of a culture that I want to be in. Like Gandalf, if anything worthy can make it through this dark night and sort of be infused in the DNA of what comes after, then I will consider it a success.
Hell yeah, brother. Unbelievable. Talk to me real quick about the process. Is like, what came up for you in the journey of the unfoldment and the beauty of writing the book? What'd you learn about yourself? What'd you learn about the process? And then talk about how people can get it when it's coming out.
Yeah. I learned, anybody out there, I would encourage you to write a book, even if it's just for yourself, because the amount of things I learned about myself, and this, whoever, I'm not like, nothing to hide here, but it's like, I realized after I wrote it, I'm like, this claims to be a history of philosophy, but it's actually just like a biography of me. Like, because what you see when you read this is just like, it's my heart, my soul. It's just like, anybody who reads it is like, me better than people that have known me my whole life. And so it is that, like, in this exercise of being completely authentic and sort of showing and sharing who you really truly are, the things you think about, like your mind, whatever, to the world. Something like writing a book where you're forced to get those thoughts and things you think out of your head, look at them in the face, you meet yourself. And so it was amazing. And it had this weird way of being exactly what I needed in my life at each section of the way. Like, whoever I was writing about had a way of having a message for me that I needed to hear at that time.
Beautiful.
And it was awesome, and it was unbelievable. And I think the thing I probably learned the most about myself was, this is going to sound strange to you after we just talked about how much I love Stoicism, but I think the conclusion I came to that was most revolutionary for me is what I had intuited or sensed at some level was like, I love Stoicism, but at some level, it seems to me there's something missing.
Yeah.
Like, And so that was I kind of explore that a little bit in the book. Because like if you think about it, not that you want to change it too much, but it's like it did kind of fall once with the fall of Rome. It sort of fell too. And so then you start to wonder, well, why is that the case? Why didn't it stay around sort of and inflame and capture the European mind? And then you start to ask, okay, like what did Christianity have that Stoicism didn't have that caused it to captivate the minds of everybody? And then you start to think about like hope, charity, compassion, and some of the things they built out through stories. And so that was, I think, for me, this revelation of how much I had been missing out on some of those extra virtues, because Stoicism has the courage, wisdom, temperance, kindness, I think are the four.
Yep.
And then like faith, hope, charity, love, I guess, are some of the more Christian ones. And so it's like you start to add those and you start to see it. So like quick story. Yeah. To illustrate what I'm talking about. So Albert Camus is like an existentialist and nihilist. And he's like 1960s, one of the more famous modern philosophers. He wrote a book called The Myth of Sisyphus. In the Myth of Sisyphus, that details the Greek myth of Sisyphus was the guy who was condemned to roll a boulder uphill for all of eternity and then have the boulder roll back down. And he would repeat that process over and over again. Now, the conclusion that Albert Camus comes to is that you have to imagine Sisyphus happy, but that's because there is no hope. Like, and that's a little bit to me, like kind of what Stoicism leads to if you're not careful. I'm not saying it has to go there, but some of the idea of like think, for instance, if the Myth of Sisyphus was a Christian story, it would be a lot like the story of Jericho, where the walls fall after the seventh time around the wall.
Yep.
And so in that case, Sisyphus, it's like, yeah, maybe the boulder doesn't crack the first 999 times, but that 1,000th time, it's the classic, like break the rock. Like it's not going to do anything the first but the 10,000th time it breaks. Like that's the hope. And so it's just, to me, it seems like one of the things we struggle with in modern society the most is with increasing suicide and meaninglessness, feelings of meaninglessness and like nihilism and all of those things. I think the current problem we face with is sort of the darkened horizon that creates for humanity in terms of why do this at all. And so another thing I hope to do with my book is sort of re-illuminate the horizon a little bit and sort of try to reintroduce hope in a way that's palatable to somebody who previously has been just focused on Stoicism exclusively.
That's beautiful, brother. It's a beautiful journey, and there's a reason why you're on it, and you're exploring the path, and you're stewarding in hope for people, and that's the hope for you anyway, right? To be a beacon of hope and truth, and you're in your own way, you're bringing light to some darkened areas, and I appreciate that. That's beautiful. So when is the book coming out? Where can people find it?
Yeah, so February 11th, it's going to come out. It's going to be ebook originally, and then it's going to be print on demand on Amazon. So it's going to be available on Amazon. The only thing that might change that a little bit is the editor, how long they end up taking, but it's supposed to be February 11th. So if it's not February 11th, it'll be very shortly after that.
Great little Valentine's Day gift for the world, brother. Spreading love around, man. Well, I appreciate you. I have high regard for you as a human being. I think you're doing a lot of great things. I'm excited to continue our friendship and where that might lead. And just any way I could be of service to you, brother, I'm here. But thank you so much for being on the show today, brother.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was awesome. And I hope to see you in Austin soon, my man.
I'll be back soon, brother. We'll connect. Take care.
Sounds good. See you.